Welcome to Practical Sea School. Now, we are big advocates of people learning how to sail on their own boats. So with this in mind, we thought we'd put together a short series of videos about how to buy an entry-level boat. Now, Black Sheep is about a year away from being in the water, and we want to get sailing in something as soon as possible so that we can carry on making our video tutorials over this winter. So we are actually also in the market for an entry-level boat ourselves. The boat we're looking at today is a 1978 Carter 30. They've got a really good reputation for sailing well, and 30 foot for us is a great size because it would enable us to lend Varushka out to our members for them to be able to do their Yachtmaster exams on. The boat's been owned by a local fisherman here for the last 10 years. It's been out on the hard here in the same yard that we're in for the last 2, and I've been admiring her lines for a while. But before I get too carried away with that side of things, the first thing I always do when looking at a boat for a client usually, or for myself, is to crunch some numbers. Now, this has nothing whatsoever to do with money. It's to do with the characteristics of the boat. A really good source for this information is the website sailboatdata.com, and you can go onto here and find the stats on pretty much every production boat. The first number I look for is the sail area to displacement ratio. Now, don't be daunted by how technical these are sounding. There's a really easy rule of thumb you can follow to get a good idea about what kind of boat it is you're looking at. Now, for a cruising boat, for offshore work, I'm looking for a sail area to displacement ratio of between 15 and 18. And what this number is essentially the power of the rig. Much above 18, the rig's getting really powerful, much more racing orientated, and will be quite a handful to sail. Much below 15, into the 12s, into the 13s, and you're talking about a very underpowered boat, which is going to go slow in light winds, and you're probably going to end up motoring an awful lot. So the next geeky number I'm going to look at is the ballast to displacement ratio. Now, this number essentially tells you how much of the weight of the boat is held low down in the keel. Yeah, so how much righting moment the boat has. Again, there's a rule of thumb for an offshore cruiser. I'm looking for between 35 and 45. Varushka, conveniently, with a Carter 30 is at 40, so I'm very happy with this. If you go much above 45, towards 50, you get a very strong righting moment, and this can actually make the boat feel quite jerky and uncomfortable. Anybody who has been on a cruising boat with the mast down in a seaway will know exactly what I'm talking about. If you go down too low, below 35, under 30 for example, and actually the boat really isn't suitable for big seas and offshore work and is prone to capsize. The final number I look at for a boat this size is the displacement to length ratio, and the rule of thumb for this for an offshore cruising boat is somewhere between 200 and 300. Now, much below 200 and the boat becomes very sensitive to loading it up for longer voyages. There are other numbers you can look at, such as capsize screening formula and comfort index, but a 30-foot boat is going to be penalised very heavily on these simply because of its size. So I'm not too worried about these for Varushka. Another bit of useful information given on this website is that the production run was 18 years and over 300 were built. That's a really good sign. Once I've established that the characteristics of a boat are suitable for its intended purpose, we can start to think about money. And as far as I'm concerned, a boat from the late 1970s is completely valueless. The only value it has is what has been spent on it in the last 10 to 15 years. So with this in mind, what I'll do is go around a boat and I will add together everything that has had some money spent on it in the last 10 to 15 years. From the total of that, I will deduct the costs of any obvious repairs or equipment replacement, and the outcome of all of that will basically be the offer price I will advise my client to put down on the boat. Now, every boat's different, but I find a good place to start usually is with the rudder. And what I'm looking for is play in the mounts. Now, the bronze gudgeon on Verushka is in really good shape, but I did notice that where the stock goes through the hull, there's actually quite a lot of play. Now, I couldn't see that there was a bush obviously missing, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'll be pessimistic and I'll add £500 straight away for repair. The hull had a full osmosis treatment done about 10 years ago, and it had been copper coated. The copper coating has only just been taken off in the last few months, and I saw the hull before it had been primed and anti-fouled, and it was in a really good shape with a lot of the epoxy coating still present. So that expensive osmosis treatment still has some value, so I'm going to add £1,000 onto the value for this. Verushka is equipped with a sail drive. Now, these have some advantages, but they do have a big rubber seal which needs replacing pretty regularly. With Volvos like this, it's every 7 years. Parts are expensive and it's a good day's work, so I'm going to deduct £600 off the value of this boat for these works. Do bring a magnet with you when you do this so you can check the material of the keel. This is obviously lead, which is great, and begins to explain some of those numbers we were seeing earlier. Check the whole hull for any impact damage, but especially the keel, and get a really close look at that joint between the keel and the hull. Generally be observant. This paddle wheel caked in anti-fouling doesn't bode well for the instruments. If the top sides were gleaming and freshly painted, I'd add a value of £1,500 onto this boat, but they're not, so they get nothing. If you don't know the value of something, you can simply look it up on the web or contact suppliers. If you're selling a boat, I think it's a really good idea to put together a PDF document with copies of invoices for big ticket items at least, so that this process is really easy for prospective buyers. First thing I do once on board is to finish checking the rudder and the tiller connection here. This has a bit of play, but it's looking pretty good, and we've already got some money in the pot for these works, so I'm happy with it. This I'm not happy with. This is the engine controller. It stops the cockpit locker lid opening fully, so no wonder it's pretty bashed up, and also it's right next to the main sheet. This is going to have to be replaced and also moved, so I'm going to put in £300 for these works. In the decent sized cockpit locker, there's a pretty new Airbus Batcher forced air diesel heater. Now, it's located in a really annoying position for getting stuff in and out of the cockpit locker, but it is pretty new and therefore it's going to get a value of £750. Verushka comes with a brand new inflatable dinghy, £450. There are a few things as annoying as a leaky deck hatch above your head. Now, all the deck hatches on Verushka were replaced 2 years ago. That's a real big bonus, and I'm going to add a value of £800 for this. The boat's equipped with a manual windlass, which is great for this size, but it looks pretty old, so I'm not going to actually give any value for this. One really big plus of Verushka is that all the standing rigging and a lot of running rigging has been replaced in the last few months. To supply all this and rig it would have been around £1,200. As well as the new rigging, we have brand new spray hood, stack pack and dodgers. The value for all this, I'm going to put at £800. Verushka has a fully battened mainsail, which is pretty old, but there's still some fill left in the cloth. I'm not going to give it any value, but it certainly doesn't need replacement urgently, so it's cost neutral. Do be really careful when putting out sails on windy days with the boat propped up in the yard. The Genoa on Verushka is in really good condition. There's a bit of UV damage on the UV strip, but that's what it's for. But the cloth itself is lovely and crispy and pretty much as new. So I'm going to add £800 for this. The Fachner furling gear is new to this boat and has been reconditioned, and there's a brand new top swivel, so I'm going to add £500 for this. It looks as though the only instrument that works is depth. Now, we think it's really important that for offshore sailing outer side of land, you know your distance travelled through the water. Also for sail trim, having speed through the water is so useful. So we're going to deduct £600 for a new log. All the upholstery throughout the boat has been redone in the last few months, and it's a really nice cloth and it really helps to make the interior feel smart. I'm not sure how to value this as I'm not an upholsterer, but I'm going to stick £1,000 on for this. The heads unit is brand new, never used, so it gets £100 for this. Now, before we get too carried away with the interior, let's finish off our survey of the canvas. Now, here we've got an older Genoa. It could be bigger, it could be smaller than the one that's already up there. Either way, it's an old Hancon Genoa which has reefing points, which has been converted to being a furler. It has zero value. Next is a storm sail, again pretty old. There's no obvious way of fixing a storm sail onto this boat, i.e. there's no enough forestay, so as far as I'm concerned, no value. Next up from the sail locker is the symmetric spinnaker. Or is it? It's way too small for this boat. It's about 5 meters by 5 meters. Now, this is typical. Time and time again I look at boats and they have random sails thrown into the sail locker, which get you all excited. This is actually pretty old and pretty shot, so I wouldn't have got too excited about it, even if it was the right size. No value. Okay, what we've got here is a lot more promising. This is the asymmetric spinnaker in a snuffer. Now, it was too windy for me to pull this up when we were filming, but I did actually pull it up a couple of days beforehand and the size was spot on. The cloth is really fresh and it's heavy enough for us to use this sail deep downwind in moderate winds even. So it's a really versatile sail. There's a lot of value with this, so I'm going to add £1,200 onto the value of a boat for this. Although the instruments are pretty shot, Verushka does come with a auto helm tiller pilot that can steer to the wind if it has the right information going to it, which is a big plus, and also an assortment of older VHFs and chart plotters. I'm going to give all of this a second-hand value of £800. Verushka comes with a pretty big calorifier, which must have been fitted in the last 5 years or so. I'm going to give that £300. All the cabin floors have been replaced in the last year. This really lifts the interior and makes it feel clean and fresh. It looks to be really good quality marine ply as well. I'm going to put a value of £1,000 for these works. Now, the process that we're going through today is not a survey. It's more of a feasibility study, but I will always check the area behind the keel for any stress cracks or delamination. Likewise, I'll always check underneath the mast for any softness, whether it's deck stepped or keel stepped. I'll have a good look at the matrix to see how it's bonded to the hull and generally how substantial it is. With the Carter 30s, it's really impressively built actually. And I'll always check the area again forward of the keel for any stress cracks or delamination, which would be evidence of a hard grounding. Now, if I did find any evidence of a hard grounding in any of these areas, I would probably simply walk away. Now, it's common when you buy a second-hand boat to get all sorts of bits and bobs, far too numerous to start listing here. It's much better to have one type of life jacket though, so that you only need to carry one type of rearming kit. So these are valueless. Let's now have a look at the engine. I'll always start with general engine checks. Wobble. The oil was reassuringly clean and at the right level. But the only way to really test the engine is to get on and start it and run it for a while, which can be done on the hard, despite what a lot of surveyors will write in their reports, quite easily, as long as you supply the engine with some coolant water. Now, we didn't have time to do this on the day we were filming. The engine probably needed a new impeller before we did, so I will do this before deciding to put an offer on. I know that the engine hasn't done very many hours and it isn't the original. It was replaced in 1996, so I'm going to give this a value of 1,000. Do be mindful of those small jobs which can accumulate. This is a little bit of rot around the companionway hatch on Verushka. It's going to cost me nothing in materials to fix, but it will take me about half a day, and very quickly those half days can add up. So there was a couple of things we forgot to catch on camera. Verushka does come with an anchor, but it's old, so no value. And also it does come with a brand new Bluetooth stereo worth about £300. So that brings our total to a tidy £10,000. We're gonna have to go away and sleep on this and decide whether or not we put an offer down for this amount. But before we do, there's a couple of things we need to consider. The first one is where we're going to put Verushka once she's back in the water, and we need to check for availability. Ideally, we want to put her on a mooring to save money. The second thing is all the additional safety equipment you need to get a boat like that into commission for offshore sailing. Now, a good place to start for this is our own safety equipment checklist. This is available on our website, and I'll put a link to it in the description below. One last thing to take into consideration is that over the last couple of years, more people have been buying boats, more young people have been buying boats, which is fantastic, and this has put the price up by quite a bit, around 20%. So I would factor that in terms of you being flexible on your offer price. That's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to let you know what we decide, and we will also look at how we use a surveyor, or whether or not we even get a surveyor involved, and also, if we decide to go ahead and get Verushka, what commissioning works we will undertake. Look forward to seeing you then.